Good evening, Los Angeles. For the past 2.5 months, I've tried to come before my fellow Angelenos, each night or every couple nights, to talk about the work of our government that you have comprised and elected, the taxpayers that you give and demand the services that should be here, to respond to crisis and to keep government working, not just in an impartial way, but because of the values that we hold, that every life is sacred, that we want to protect those lives and we want them to grow, that lives and livelihoods are important. And each night I've tried to come before you and tell you about that work being done by brave community members and first responders, by healthcare workers, by everyday people who are from their hearts giving of themselves. At first we just met one threat. It was the coronavirus. We couldn't see it, but we knew about it, and we saw its devastation before it came here to Los Angeles. Second, we saw economic devastation that was unlike anything we had ever experienced in our lives. The hopelessness and the helplessness that came, and the work necessary to try to mitigate that as we asked Washington to respond to help all of us in the midst of these tough economic days. And then third, an old enemy revisited us, but it actually had never gone away. The scourge of racism that has been part of the American story. In our best and worst times, we have nevertheless always had racism that has made this country not equal for all, but too unequal for many. And the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, who should have been celebrating her 27th birthday tonight, and so many others, we realized that this was not just a one crisis or a two crisis. This is a moment where we see how these intersect with each other, how the inequality in our society affects each one of us when we have an economic and a health threat, or when we see the pernicious threat of what discrimination and racism does to all of us, especially African Americans. This week we have held a lot of pain. We've seen a lot of protests, and we've ushered in a lot of peace. And maybe, just maybe, we've seen the beginning of some progress. I know how raw and fragile this moment is for most of us. I know how much we look for the enemy amongst us instead of doing the work to find the enemy within. I know that one step forward can't make up for centuries of progress backwards. And yet I know too in my heart in LA who we are, what we believe in, what we see reflected on our streets, and who we can be. And it is my role as your mayor to help not just console, but to guide, to take brave steps where, yes, there's always going to be criticism of too much or not enough, but to move forward through this door that has opened for us, to create a more just city and a country for all of us. But we're still mostly, if we're honest, in a lot of pain. Pain held first and foremost by Black Americans who haven't just seen and felt the traumatic death of George Floyd, but who carry the burden of centuries of racism in our country unevenly on their shoulders. A commissioner of mine who is African American told me how he was jogging during the COVID-19 crisis and tripped and fell. In the streets, he happened to be in Beverly Hills, a Black man bleeding. Nobody would help him because they saw first a threat rather than a human being who needed help. But we all feel pain right now, those Americans who have joined as allies in this fight to once and for all stand up and eradicate racism, not just in our hearts, but in our structures and our actions. Pain held by our police officers, peace officers, and National Guardsmen and women on the line who have protected people and neighborhoods, who are exhausted and traumatized too by what they saw in that video with George Floyd, and even some of the words that have come at them this week. The National Guard began to use fewer personnel today, and barring any surge in unlawful activity, Guard troops stationed in the city of Los Angeles will begin to go home to their families and communities, some right here in our city, in the coming days. Although the county and the sheriff, neighboring cities may request their presence, and you may see them here in the Southland. To them, I thank them for being here, for being Americans who answered the call. And many of them have been working with us with COVID-19 at our food distribution centers and other places, called up after earthquake and fire. We thank you for your service. It is so tough for us to hold the pain that we feel no matter who we are. Whether we're in a protest, whether it's just our experience as African Americans, whether it's allies who see this for the first time, those folks who are containing this pain know that we are all hurting. But I'm here tonight with the burden and the responsibility, the hope and the opportunities as your mayor. And together with leaders across the country who I've been talking with each hour and each day, to see what we can do as local leaders if there's not the national leadership, to say this isn't just about our feelings, this is about our actions and the coalition that we can build together of finding common ground. And I want to talk to you about that tonight. I said it once, but I want to say it again. We must not find the enemies amongst us. We have to find the enemies within us, to collectively own this moment and each one of our responsibilities, not just to point the finger to who's worse, but to that disease that affects each one of us, the way that we are all silent spreaders, and the way that our policies and priorities, the way that we have spent our money or put our programs, has an effect on the lives of our neighbors and fellow Americans. We must act on the promise to eradicate racism in our hearts and in our policies, in how we spend money and don't spend money. Confront what has happened in America on all of our watches, not just at this moment, and determine what we can collectively do to erase that and bring about a moment that is safe for all of us, no matter our color, our neighborhood, or our title. We must recognize the work that each one of us has to do in the days ahead, and it won't be easy. It will bring pain with it. But it is a better pain to have than to say, let's keep the status quo. The burden that we must each bear in order to breathe hope back into a moment that I know feels for too many hopeless and helpless. That better tomorrow, that work begins today, as it does with each day of the rising sun, to come forward and to call ourselves to account, and to see what we can do to ensure that Black Americans and others from communities of color are met with opportunities, not obstacles, with outstretched hands and not knees to their neck. We need to end structural racism in America, and we must overcome, and I know that we can do this, but only together. And I want to once again state that harsh police tactics like we've seen on several videos this week have no place in the City of Angels. And where officers are deployed, they must keep the peace without violence. All city employees, myself, police officers, civilians, have to be held accountable. That is part of our jobs. And our Civilian Police Commission's Inspector General is reviewing the footage and will ensure a full investigation of the incidents depicting excessive uses of force, which can lead to officer removal or dismissal or discipline. And I want to also say every incident always has a larger context, but we have to keep the peace without violence whenever we can. Now, I know that there are those of you, we kind of almost listen through different ears right now. There are those who, whenever you hear me say how heroic police officers are, and that the work that they do with their lives on the line can be, who don't believe it, and hear an excuse for bad behavior. But I won't ever stop lifting up the stories, the heroic stories of our police officers on our streets. I've seen them every single day, as your mayor and long before that, of people trapped in violence who are saved by guardian angels, of young people who are mentored, who teach something to a police officer, but in return get lessons back. Folks who are caught in sex trafficking, liberated by the men and women of this department. And when we call 911 in the most dangerous of situations, it is they that we call on, and it is they who answer. I refuse not to give those stories a voice. Now, on the other side, others, some even on our police force, might think that whenever we say we're going to invest resources to heal injustices, that we have to confront racism or hold people accountable for their behaviors, only hear that as an attack on our police department or on police officers. But it's not. And I won't stop moving forward for our city in investing in the places and the spaces that can create peace. For you, for us, for our entire city. We have to all ask ourselves, if everything we do is so right and the status quo is working, why are so many things still wrong in our society? If this is only perceived as a reaction to political pressure, why have we taken these brave steps before collectively? Without conflict, they haven't been easy, but in coalitions that sometimes are the pace setters for this nation and even this world. Raising the minimum wage, making community college free so that 46% more kids can go to college in just the first 2 years from LAUSD to our community colleges, fighting off a pandemic together. But we as a society are blind if we cannot see the disparities, and we are deaf if we do not hear what protesters on the streets are saying. And luckily, here in LA, those who would willfully ignore the community campaigns and the past traumas, the hard conversations that have led to real change in our city and in our country, who want to paint a misleading picture that somehow we are waking up to the problem of inequity and racism in our city and our country, we can prove wrong. But that doesn't mean that we have done close to enough. That's also my message tonight and over the last few days. That's what I believe as your mayor, but it's what I believe as your neighbor, what I believe as a fellow Angeleno and American. That's what I know that every police officer who bears the burden of our collective failures feels in her or his heart too. Our failures to deal with mental health and addiction, our failure to invest in our schools even when we've had opportunities, our failure to house our people and to make citizens of our residents instead of pushing them into the shadows. The officers have to confront that every single day, and that should not be your burden. It shouldn't be your responsibility to bear alone. It's stressful and it's traumatic. So when we say we are going to share resources, it's so that that family that you visited, to help investigate a crime and solve something and give them solace, can also produce a household full of graduates and executives instead of dropouts and prisoners. It's so that we can roll out mental health professionals and social workers to help get somebody off the street instead of asking you with a badge to do it on your own. This is to make all of us, our families, the families of police officers, all of us prouder to call this a city of angels. And this is not anti-anyone. This is pro our city. It is pro-justice. It is pro our future. It is pro-public safety if we can get it right. That's what's on the line, my friends. And I know for some it's not enough. For others it will never be enough. And for others it's way too much. But it's bold and it's brave and it's a start, and it pushes others to start up as well, to accelerate work that is not brand new. Somebody said it so well to me the other day. There are a lot more people woke, but now it's time to get out of bed, to take the actions of not just awareness, but to change, and not just through government, but in our workplaces, in our hearts, in our schools and other places where we call home. Those are the places we can eradicate this racism. These are the places we can fight for justice. This is where we can build peace and security for everyone. And I want those of you taking to the streets and protesting to know that we are listening and we are responding. If that's political pressure, then I'm sorry, that's also a democracy. I believe that all of us have a voice, no matter who we are. And that when those voices come together as loudly as we've seen, this is a moment for all of us to meet. We can't caricature who those people are. There are too many people on the streets for you to close your eyes and say, oh, it's just them. It is a reflection of the society. And as I said last week, it is the common ground we all unfortunately found through a death. When George Floyd died, from police unions to police chiefs to police officers, to everyday Angelenos, we had common ground where we condemned what we saw and called it out, but it demands we take another step forward. It isn't enough just to speak out. We have to do difficult things in the days ahead. Together, we've worked to expand opportunity in this city. I talked about free college and making minimum wage go up, and expanding our fight against homelessness, which, by the way, is the largest growth in our budget because it should be. And we need even more help because if you look at the streets, which disproportionately is African Americans, we see that still, without a right to housing, too many people suffer on our streets. We've hired a historically diverse police force that reflects our community, but we need to make sure it still does. And I need young African American women and men who are watching me right now to join our department, to be part of that. I need people growing up in Los Angeles, whatever color you are, who know your neighborhoods, to join our force as well, like so many incredible officers we have who know the people and know the blocks and know the personalities and know the peace that they will be able to promote. It's a noble thing to want to protect other human beings. It's also a noble thing to stand up for the lives of all people. Do you see that common ground? Maybe it's just me because I get attacked on all sides that sometimes I don't just see the similar attacks, I see the similar feeling. The places where we all, when we close our eyes, want to be together. These United States of America won't hold in the months and years ahead if we don't find the united part of that together. That demands justice and it demands humanity, not the dehumanization of a police officer or of a protester or of somebody because of the color of their skin. And it, yes, requires tough conversations and yes, tough decisions about budgets and other things. But let's get to the meat of that tonight so we can tell you more about the steps your city is taking to heal, to bring hope, and to bring health back. We announced a step earlier this week when I announced we'll be working to identify $250 million to be able to invest in jobs and community programs, healing for our Black community, other communities of color, for women and others who have been historically denied equitable opportunities. And yes, that comes from multiple places, including our biggest department, the police department. It's not an attack on any police officers. That is not an attack on the civilian employees who long before this are taking a 10% pay cut because of furloughs and this moment of economic and health crisis due to COVID-19. This is shared. And I want my city family, our peace officers, and our civilians to know, I know you're all sacrificing, but doesn't the worst economic moment of our life, the greatest health threat of our lives, and this powerful moment of enough is enough about American racism demand that of us all? It certainly does of me, and I will sacrifice. And I know all of us believe that those investments are ways to make sure each one of us is safer, whether you're in a squad car or walking on the sidewalk. And that's why we're working today, too. I spent over an hour with Speaker Pelosi and talked with other leaders across the country to bring our voice to Washington, to help with national legislation to save lives, and to also make investments. If we can pass the HEROES Act, which has gotten through the House, and now it's on its way to the Senate, and hopefully will be taken up soon, we can make these investments and not just make them zero-sum equations. They can be yes and. We can demand stronger cultures and better education and better tactics, and we can support peace officers, and we can say, let's not give them the burden of today. Let's invest in stopping prisons before they have to be filled, stopping homelessness before we have to find shelter, stopping dropouts before they can get educated. This is the work that our national government needs to step up and do. How do we bring about and bring back in police departments consent decrees that, yes, can be painful like we experience, but make our departments better? The state and federal government can step forward right now and join us with funds to expand our highly successful community safety partnership. This is a program in which police officers are put in communities. They volunteer for this assignment for 5 years, and they get to know everyone in that neighborhood, and the neighborhood gets to know them. They're not seen as occupiers, and they see the people who they serve with a depth that each one of them that I've ever spoken to said, this is why I became a police officer. This is who I am. It's why I strongly support proposals that are put forward right now by the California Legislative Black Caucus to make changes that are long overdue, to restore voting rights to those who are serving parole, to improve emergency response services for historically neglected communities, and finally, at long last, to seek reparations for the impact of slavery on Black Americans, something your city council, when I served on it, passed almost a decade ago. And that's finally too, and Capri Maddox is here with me today, to talk a little bit about our city's first Department of Civil and Human Rights. This is a department that will have a Civil and Human Rights Commission where we can bring discrimination and find justice in this city instead of it going unanswered. It is a place where we can see what we are missing and study those disparities to correct them in business, in education, in our society. Because if you're not measuring it, you can't manage the problem. If you don't see it, you don't see it. This department will be charged with enforcing the LA Civil and Human Rights Ordinance, which we passed in this past year before this moment, because we believe in this. And it will include an Office of Racial Equity to conduct research, outreach, and policy development, and help us apply an equity lens to how the city spends public dollars, how our programs impact communities of color, and everything we do moving forward. And before Capri comes forward, I'm so grateful to Council President Nuri Martinez, Council Members Cedillo, Wesson, Harris, Dawson, and O'Farrell, as well as partners like the Community Coalition, an extraordinary organization that has tirelessly worked since 1992 to bring justice to our communities, and the coalition that they have brought together for the critical work here. This will launch months ahead of schedule on July 1st. And tell us a little bit about this right now. I'd like to turn it over to Capri Maddox, and then I'm going to come back and also give an update on what else we're doing with COVID-19, some important updates. Capri.
Thank you, Mayor. I stand before you, first of all, as a wife married to an African-American man and the mother of an African-American teen male. And I stand before you feeling the pain that so many of our community members have felt over the years, decades, and centuries. I appreciate the title, but I had to explain who I am first. It was traumatic to see George Floyd begging for his life with a knee on his neck. He was calling for his mother as he slipped away to the other side. And that's trauma that we feel. I know all of America felt that, but as an African American, we felt it in a significant way because it's something we've seen over and over and over again. So the fear and the outrage that our communities are feeling now, the African American community is felt all the time. And we have to have the talk with our children. We have to be aware of making sure that we don't seem threatening in stores where we may carry a big purse. I carry a big mom purse, but you know, when you go in certain stores, that can be a problem because they may assume that you're a shoplifter. So there are a lot of things that we know, and we do know one thing, unfortunately still, your skin color speaks before you do in America. And this is something that we need to get beyond. When we're bird watching or jogging or even sleeping in our home like Breonna Taylor, we need to know that we are safe and secure. In this moment that we're feeling these feelings, it's important to know that America over the last few years, particularly since a lot of these things are documented on videotape, we have seen the Black Americans' inconvenient truth. And just like the movie about the environment that was done over 14 years ago, it was a warning that said in America and all over the world, if we do not deal with certain issues, we will have storms. We will have them in a variety of places. They will be more extreme, and they will happen more frequently. And that is why we wanted to step up and to see if we can make a difference and to be sure that we make a difference in this space, because this is trauma that we need to get beyond as Americans, especially as Angelenos. I just have to say, that when I started my career with the City of Los Angeles as a student worker in 1992 at the Housing Department, 3 weeks before the civil unrest of 1992, I would have never believed that in the City of Los Angeles we would have to create a department involving civil and human rights in 2020. It's time for a change. It's time for a change in Los Angeles and everywhere. And we may not be able to rely on the federal government stepping up for that change, but we want to make sure that we can do it here. And through the leadership of Mayor Garcetti and the members of the City Council, some of whom he's mentioned, we created the Civil and Human Rights Department, and they will root out injustice, bias, and leveling the playing field. I want to be very clear that we're going to be working with partners like the Black Workers Center, Community Build, the Community Coalition, and others to make a difference, and particularly even UCLA Labor Center. I could not forget them because they actually took a significant leadership role in this space. So we'll be working with government leaders, employers, landlords, creditors, and others, because we see discrimination in many forms, where African American women, as the mayor said many times, are more likely to die in childbirth, where African Americans and Latinos are paying up to $500 million extra per year for their mortgages than whites with the same credit score. In the face of discrimination at school, at work, and as a consumer or just anywhere you may be, this department will be here to help you. We will support our community-based organizations as they empower and mentor the underserved populations, particularly our youth of color. We will partner with researchers. So if you guys are researchers, we'll be calling you to find out ways to reduce systemic racism in America, particularly in our institutions. We just can't stand by. We cannot stand by and allow hate and discrimination to literally or figuratively kill our communities. This isn't easy work. I'm going to be honest. It's not easy work, but there's nothing more important, and I'll appreciate all the support of people calling me, telling me they want to serve, and we are here to serve with you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Capri Maddox, for your leadership and the way you have been an angel in the City of Angels for a long time. This has been a moment we are called to, and thank you for stepping up to the call. The other night, while I was talking about what was happening on the streets and our ongoing fight against COVID-19, we had an earthquake literally during this press conference. But it was a reminder that we have not just one thing going on, but we have still in the midst of a pandemic that we are fighting against. And so let me update you tonight briefly on that. We can't forget that we're in the middle of this, no matter what we're doing, whether we're demonstrating on the streets or remaining indoors or heading back to work or even going out to a restaurant for the first time in a long time. Please do your part to make sure that this moment doesn't bring with it a second wave or a tragic moment of us losing lives. I know this has hit a lot of families. My father's cousin, I just found out 2 days ago, died of COVID-19. We've had people in our office who have lost loved ones. This is real, and it's with us every single day. And it is almost too much to contain the pain of this moment for racial justice and to know that there's still a killer out there that is taking lives from our loved ones called COVID-19. But we do have to be aware of that. Our actions do matter right now. We have to keep our physical distance. We have to wash our hands. We have to wear our facial coverings. And we have to do everything we can, if we're able to work from home or stay at home, to do just that. Today, Governor Newsom released new state guidance that would allow many types of businesses to reopen as early as June 12th. However, the County Department of Public Health will determine when it is safe to open those businesses here in Los Angeles. I know many of you have found it confusing. The state says what is possible, counties say what is allowable. And as we've seen, more Angelenos who are ordering restaurant delivery and takeout during this crisis, So we'll be detailing what those are as soon as the county lets us know. At the same time, we know that folks have been getting more delivery, takeout during this crisis, and some of the delivery app companies have been charging excessive fees to restaurants and making it harder for them to survive just when we want to help them get up on their feet. So today I signed a city council ordinance that will temporarily cap the fees charged by delivery app companies to no more than 15% of the cost of the meal. And I hope that this will help pay for more cooks and waiters and other staff, more jobs, and help more restaurants to see that they can survive this moment that they've been struggling through. And I want to thank Council Members Mitch O'Farrell and Curran Price and Paul Krikorian for leading this work on the City Council and helping our local economy. It's also important to note today that the county reported that key indicators are now slightly increasing. This includes the transmission rate. While we had successfully reduced our transmission rate over the past few weeks to 1 or maybe even less than 1, it is now back on the rise. The County Department of Public Health anticipates that there are enough ventilators and regular hospital beds available to care for patients for the next 4 weeks, and recommends that if you are protesting, and UCLA actually put out some guidance today, that 2 to 7 days after you've been out there, or 2 to 7 days after you've stopped being out there, that it's a good time to get a test and to ensure, if necessary, that you need to isolate yourself if you've been exposed or quarantine if you've been exposed to someone. Today, the county reported 1,445 new cases, bringing the total to 61,045 cases. Each Friday, I compare to the week before. Last week, we had 51,000. This week, 61,000 cases. We've grown by 10,000 in just a week. In the city, we had 624 new cases today, bringing our total to 28,297 cases. A week ago, we had 24,261. And today we learned of 36 new deaths countywide, bringing our total fallen to 2,565 fellow Angelenos. This week was more deadly than last week, with 281 deaths compared to 245 deaths the week before. We had seen deaths coming down each week. This is the first week it's gone back up. So I'll say it again. COVID is still here, and it is still deadly. So if you're out in a protest or planning to join a demonstration, please wear your mask, maintain your distance, protect yourself, protect everyone around you, and your family and your loved ones. A total of 25 city and county test sites were open with the capacity to test 22,000 people today. That includes all of our drive-through sites, walk-in centers, and mobile test teams for the elderly at our skilled nursing facilities. And thanks to our fire department and LAPD and Department of Transportation personnel who redeployed to testing sites and volunteers who are returning to serve. And please, volunteers, come back. We definitely need you. And look at our city. This is a city that has found peace this week, and we need to promote that healing for everyone. And I'm grateful to everybody who's been working at a testing center, saving lives for us this week. Despite some temporary closures over the past several days, we've tested more than 50,000 people this week. That's good news, and you need to get a test. So please go out there to coronavirus.lacity.org/testing and schedule your appointment today if you think you need a test. In these times of challenge and of trial, in times when our deepest wounds are ripped open, our pain is bubbling at the surface, our hearts grieve, but our resolve is unbending. Many of us turn towards our faith traditions for guidance and for comfort, a little bit of direction and inspiration to cut through the chaos of this moment, to remind us human beings have absolutely been here before. And for me in these moments, I also look to the Jewish prayer for peace, a text unique in its origins but universal in its message. We have not come into being to hate or to destroy, the prayer reads. We have come into being to praise, to labor, and to love. I praise these peaceful protests, and I'm proud to join their call for change. I will continue to labor to reform our budget, to find ways to support all safety for all people in this city, to reimagine a city that doesn't just return to normal and that gets through some of the most abnormal times we've ever experienced. And I'll continue making those investments, reporting the hard truths, and helping us try to find the common ground to heal. I know that love and light can get us through these dark days, but so must our actions. And regardless of our personal beliefs, we can never see ourselves only through the lens of division. We must never be defined solely by the limits of politics or partisanship, or as I said, the enemy outside. We must look to the truths inside, the simple solutions that won't work, but the tough calls that can give us the hope for the future we deserve. And we have to keep our attention where it should be, in stopping this pandemic and on honoring with action the memory of George Floyd and all the names of our fellow Americans, our fellow Americans. Because if we are to be one nation, we must make that a reality each and every day. The heroes that are inside each one of us, whether you're marching on the streets or wearing a badge, whether you're working in City Hall or whether you're out there at home right now, watching and hoping for a better day, that is our common purpose and our common work. And we certainly need strength and love to complete it. So I wish that to you and your family tonight. And I'll take questions now. Thank you, Los Angeles. First question, please.
And first we turn to the line of Claudia Pescuda with KNX News Radio. Please go ahead.
Hi, Eric. I have two questions.
Sure.
You said that the effort to move money out of LAPD and into communities of color is not an attack on officers, but I think the officers union obviously sees your killers comment as an attack on them. Do you regret that comment? And what do you think about the union saying that they have no confidence in your leadership? And then on the COVID side, the county's health services director says they're switching from oral to front of the nose swabs because they get fewer false negatives. I'm wondering if the city is going to stick with just the oral swabs, and if so, why? Thank you.
On the second question, we go from the same lab, so if that is, they're talking about the testing centers, I'm sure that we're looking at that too. I don't have a quick answer, but we've had good results, obviously, with the swabs, the way we've worked, and the county and city testing centers have both done that. So I don't know. I'll have to look into whether they meant at their own lab or whether they're talking about all of their testing centers, but I'm sure we'll march together. Second, on the first question, no. Nor will I have any words that I say distorted, picked out with tweezers, and put out of context. It is so important what we say, but it's also so important to listen to what we say. When I talked about killers, I said our collective burden here in this society is that we let black men and women die. In this city, if you're born in Watts, you live 12 years less than if you live in Bel Air. Not because of anything that you did wrong, but because of where you're born and the color of your skin. So I said, we have a choice, and I pointed at myself. We collectively have a choice of whether we will be those who heal or whether we will continue being the killers. That is what I said, and I absolutely did not say that about the league, about police officers, and I won't have those words distorted. Now, I will say this, and I did reach out to our police union. I invite everyone to the table, and it will require our collective leadership. It is so easy, as I said, to find the enemies without. And it's why I spent so much time tonight talking about the pain within, because I know our officers hold that. I want to say to folks who go up to an officer, and I get it, out of pain, who yell at them, or who call them all bastards or pigs, that is wrong, and I will say that that is wrong. And I know I will get criticism the other direction. But I've seen too much of the heroism of our men and women, as I said in this press conference, to not tell those stories. But I also will hold anybody who is a public employee working for taxpayers accountable. And I don't have to choose between those two things. And I don't have to choose between just making this about policing, which is critically important, and investments in our community. If we don't see those two things connected, we are putting our officers at risk. We are putting our people of color in this city at risk. And we must do everything we can to build common ground and peace. And if folks want to divide that or say other words, I'll keep inviting you back. I'll keep inviting you back. I'll keep making you an offer to lead in this crisis. And I think that there is a place at the table for anyone who wants to. Next question, please.
And next we turn to the line of Robert Kovacic with NBC. Please go ahead.
Hey, Robert.
Mayor Garcetti, good afternoon. I'm actually, forgive the noise, standing here on the plaza of LAPD, and we're getting ready for a vigil here. I was wondering if you could speak directly to the men and women of the LAPD, some who have told us, in their words, not mine, that they feel as if you have been unfairly targeting their department.
I refuse to accept this. I can't say it more times. I've said every single night, while others were attacking police officers, that these are folks who intervene and save lives. When a victim of domestic violence is on the line, when somebody's entrapped in sexual trafficking, the folks who solve crimes, bring peace, mentor young people. Now, when there's misconduct by anybody, whether they're a police officer or not in this city, there of course has to be accountability. And I can't not ever say those two things because those are the demands of being a public servant. But I refuse to say that. I know police officers too much. I've been with families who have lost their loved ones. I was at the hospital after the traffic collision that we saw on the news to be with our officers, to see that they were okay, and to pray with them, to be with them. I reject that. And leadership is difficult, no question about it. But leadership demands holding people accountable and making sure that nobody ever erases the truth. You know, when I go to every graduation, I've been virtually, my wife or I, have been to almost every single graduation over 7 years of new officers. The reason I go to them is because I want them to hear from me and I want to look them in the eye and get to know them. Because they've done something that very few people will do. They volunteered to put their lives on the line to protect the people of this city. Now, policing is difficult. Policing is traumatic. We collectively shouldn't put too much on their shoulders. And we should always demand accountability and improve our systems that they have to inherit. Improve our training, find tactics, equipment that can save lives. Do the 8 things that I talked about and that LA now has pledged and is implementing that can save lives by 72%. The way that our officers have reduced officer-involved shootings by 45% in terms of fatal officer shootings in just the last 4 years. Those are things that they did and that need to be uplifted if we're going to get through this. While at the same time, we say, of course, all of us should start making investments in the places that result in less of that conflict on the street, less of that trauma for youth and men in particular of color, and to find better places. If we want to shout at each other, we won't get through this moment. But I want to open up the spaces and the places for police officers and youth of color to have more interactions peaceably and to learn each other's stories. I want to turn more of those young residents of our city into aspiring to be and to become peace officers. And I want to make sure LA is always safeguarding lives, and where lives or force has been used unnecessarily, that there are consequences, because that can result, as we've seen, in people dying. But to my officers, thank you for what I know has been a tough week. Nobody has abandoned you. We have all sacrificed ourselves first, and we are making sure that this is a shared burden, not because it's your turn, but because I also believe in you, in your peace, and you getting home safely each night too. Next question, please.
Next, we turn to the line of Patrick Healy with NBC4. Please go ahead.
Hey, Patrick.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. Question, why do you feel it is so important symbolically to cut money from the police department rather than, if it's a matter of economics, finding the savings elsewhere? What is the statement you were trying to make, and where do you think those cuts might come from?
I guess I'm a little less interested in statements than in progress. I'm a little less interested in words than in actions. I'm more interested in investing in programs we know that work, that can help release the burden and provide relief for our officers that are called on to do too many things that is really social work for our society. And I guess I'm called on the investments that we know and quite frankly have just underfunded. Even as we've expanded it, and we can all pat ourselves on the back. For instance, our gang reduction youth development program has grown by 50% since I've been mayor, even though the number of officers has stayed the same. I want to be clear, this is not about symbolism. It is about all of us saying, where are the priorities of the money, and what's the smartest way that we can put that in a place that prevents violence, that prevents division, that makes sure that racial inequities are dealt with. For others, it may be an important symbol, and I embrace that if that's important to them. But I want you to know my heart on this, that this is about making sure, just as we squeezed as much money, whenever I found a nickel or a dime over the last 7 years, we've been putting it into the biggest crisis we face, homelessness, and it's still not enough. And I now come to believe, even as we do this and make progress, that the national government has to get involved in a big way for us to see homelessness eradicated from the streets, not just of Los Angeles, but Washington, D.C., and other cities around the country. And so as we look at this, this is not about symbols. This is about substance. This is not about politics. This is about progress. And yes, those decisions are tough, but nobody in a big city where we have a big department, we have to all figure out those tough decisions of how we can find those resources wherever they are. And trust me, those investments will be good for all of us, not just, first and foremost, the public, but for our police as well. Next question, please.
And we have no further questions in queue.
Okay. Thank you. I know it was a long one tonight. I wish you a weekend of peace. We'll continue to work for a city of progress. And with that, I'll give some remarks now in Spanish. Thank you and have a good weekend. Buenas tardes, Los Ángeles. Esta semana hemos tenido mucho dolor. Hemos visto tantas protestas y hemos recibido la paz. Y es posible que veamos el principio del progreso. Más que todo, seguimos con dolor. El dolor que lleva la comunidad afroamericana, quien han visto y sienten el trauma de la muerte de George Floyd y de Breonna Taylor, quien debería de haber celebrando sus 17 años hoy, pero quienes también lleven la carga de siglos de racismo en nuestro país. Este dolor es difícil, pero continuamos a encontrar pasos adelante y juntos por la justicia y la salud de la comunidad y de nuestra economía. La Guardia Nacional hoy empezó a usar menos personal y si seguimos sin actividad criminal, la Guardia en Los Ángeles podrá empezar a regresar a casa en los días siguientes, aunque el condado y el alguacil y ciudades alrededor quizás pidan se queden un rato más. Debemos reconocer el trabajo que todos tenemos que hacer y la carga que tenemos que llevar para traer la esperanza a un momento que muchos dicen quizás no tenga esperanza. Pero yo veo un futuro mejor. Y este trabajo empieza hoy. Tenemos que asegurar que afroamericanos y otros de comunidades de color reciban oportunidades, no obstáculos. Y tenemos que acabar con el racismo estructural en este país. Y yo sé que lo haremos juntos. Quiero repetir que las tácticas violentas que hemos visto de la policía en varios videos esta semana no tienen lugar en Los Ángeles. Y sin importar a dónde desplegamos a la policía, tienen que mantener la paz sin violencia. Nuestro inspector general de la Comisión de la Policía está revisando los videos e investigando estos casos, las cuales podrían resultar en disciplina o expulsión de los oficiales. Quisiera agradecer a todos quienes están marchando en las calles de manera pacífica. Los escuchamos y estamos respondiendo para hacer esta ciudad más equitativa y justa. Estamos empezando ahora y estas victorias son suyas y llegarán más. Hemos trabajado para ampliar oportunidades para todos, aumentados en el salario mínimo y lanzamos el colegio comunitario gratis. Tenemos una fuerza policial diversa y los hemos entrenado en prejuicios implícitos y en cómo disminuir la tensión para evitar el uso de violencia. Pero aún no es suficiente. Empezamos esta semana con recortes todos departamentos, pero también el departamento de policía, para invertir en empleos, comunidades y curación. Por eso le estoy pidiendo a nuestro Congreso que hagan los cambios que necesitamos, y necesitamos ahora. Un estándar nacional para uso de fuerza, investigaciones independientes de brutalidad de la policía, decretos de consentimiento en departamentos con una historia de violencia y discriminación. Y necesitamos fondos estatales y federales para ampliar nuestra alianza comunitaria de seguridad, para mejorar las relaciones entre policía y las comunidades que sirven. Y por eso también apoyo la propuesta del grupo de congresistas afroamericanos en California para restaurar el derecho de votar para aquellos bajo libertad condicional y mejorar la respuesta de emergencia para comunidades históricamente olvidadas. Y finalmente, obtener reparaciones por el impacto de la esclavitud en afroamericanos. Por eso estamos lanzando un nuevo departamento en la ciudad de Los Ángeles, el Departamento de Derechos Humanos y Civiles, y la comisión de los cuales tiene el deber de proteger a todos en la ciudad de discriminación, inmigrantes, afroamericanos, mujeres, y de aplicar la ordenanza municipal para derechos civiles y humanos. Y ese departamento tendrá una oficina de equidad racial para investigar, hacer alcance a distintas comunidades, desarrollar políticas y analizar cómo gastamos nuestro dinero y cómo nuestros programas afectan a las comunidades de color. Esta comisión empezará su trabajo el 1 de julio y me comprometo a tomar aún más pasos adelante. No podemos olvidar que estamos en medio de una pandemia. La amenaza de COVID-19 sigue en nuestra ciudad cada día. Hoy el gobernador Newsom anunció nuevas pautas estatales para negocios que pueden abrir el 12 de junio. Sin embargo, el Departamento de Salud Pública de Los Ángeles va a determinar cuándo es seguro abrir esos negocios aquí en Los Ángeles. A la vez hemos visto más angelinos ordenando comida de restaurantes para entrega o para llevar durante esta crisis. Y algunas compañías han estado cobrando tarifas demasiadas altas y haciéndolo más difícil para los restaurantes puedan sobrevivir. Entonces, hoy firmé una ordenanza que aplica una tapa temporaria en las tarifas que cobran estas compañías al 15% del costo del orden, y espero que esto ayudará a nuestros restaurantes y guardar empleos para cocineros, meseros y más personal. Además, hoy el condado anunció nuevos indicadores que están subiendo un poco. Esto incluye nuestra tasa de infección. Si estuviste en una manifestación o si tienes planes de ir a una, lleva una cobertura facial, por favor. Practica la sana distancia lo más posible y hazte la prueba. Protégete a ti mismo, a quienes están cerca de ti durante estos eventos, y protege a tu familia y seres queridos. El condado recomienda que se ponga en cuarentena durante 14 días si ha estado en una manifestación para protegerte a ti y a tu familia. Hoy el condado anunció 1,445 nuevos casos, con un total de 61,045. En la ciudad tuvimos 642 nuevos casos y un total de 28,297. Hoy supimos de 36 fallecidos con un total de 2,565. Les recuerdo que este virus permanece aquí y sigue siendo mortal. Si estuviste en una manifestación o si tienes planes, es importante tener una prueba. Visita la página coronavirus.lacity.org/testing para programar una cita para usted o un miembro de su familia. Estos momentos de inmenso dolor son muy difíciles, pero tenemos que mantener nuestro enfoque en la justicia y nuestra salud. Yo tengo mucha confianza como su alcalde de esta ciudad. Nosotros tenemos la fuerza, el amor que necesitamos en la crisis económica, la crisis de salud y esta crisis de la justicia racial. Seguimos marchando pacíficamente y luchando por la justicia para corregir los daños del racismo, respondiendo al odio con la esperanza y siempre liderando con esta fuerza y amor. Gracias, Los Ángeles. Adelante juntos. Buenas noches. Thank you all.